Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat Live Lectures. Dear friends, today we have come with the concluding part to an overview of epistemology in classic Indian philosophy. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy in School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, Sir.
So, welcome viewers. Today we would be discussing about epistemology in classical Indian philosophy. Earlier on this topic, we have already discussed the definition of knowledge according to different systems of classical Indian philosophy. We also discussed the difference between mere cognition and knowledge as it occurs in classical Indian philosophical texts. In today's discussion, we would be mainly focusing on different theories of error. So now, as we all know, knowledge per se is different, is as opposed to cases of error. In the cases of error, as stands to reason, something is cognized as what it is not. In the cases of actual knowing, something is cognized along with its actual nature. So, there is a mismatch between what the nature of an object actually is and the way we know it in the cases of error. But a larger question that might come across your mind is, why should we theorize about errors? We come to know about them, and the moment we realize our error, we correct ourselves. So, what is the philosophical importance of the cases of error? Also, here it could be mentioned that as opposed to in classical Indian philosophy, in Western philosophical traditions, errors do not occupy an important place in the same way as they do in classical Indian philosophy. So, in classical Indian philosophy, there are robust discussions on why errors occur and what is the actual process that goes on that goes into cognizing something as something else. Now, talking about the reason why error is such an important point of discussion in classical Indian philosophy is that according to most of the schools, we enter into an inquiry about the nature of things, about the nature of duty, that is dharma, about the nature of jnana, and so on and so forth, for a reason. So, whenever an inquiry is initiated, it is never for the sake of inquiry itself. An inquiry is initiated for soteriological purposes. What do we mean by soteriological purpose? For the purpose of liberation. So, but a larger question in that case would be, why do we require liberation? Liberation we require because of certain kind of dissatisfaction that we might have with the present state of affairs in the world. Most of us find the present state of affairs in the world to be insufficient for our supreme well-being. So, that would mean if we find the empirical world to be in a certain way insufficient for our ultimate well-being, that means there is something wrong somewhere. So, otherwise we would have attained what we always wanted to. So, there is some kind of impediment somewhere. So, according to most of the schools of Indian philosophy, it happens because we do not cognize things as they actually are. Some way or the other, we are mistaken about the actual nature of the world. And our mistakes, our mistaken cognition could be due to several reasons. So, according to some schools of philosophy, it is because the reason of Maya, because things things appear to us as what they are not. Another term that is used for another reason that is cited as the cause of mistaken cognition is avidya, which basically means inappropriate knowledge about something, about a given fact. So there could be several reasons, but error becomes important because somewhere there is a mismatch between the actual nature of the world and the way we cognize it. And according to most of the schools, this is the reason why we incur, so to speak, certain kind of dissatisfaction with the world. If we miscognize the world, then we act towards it in not the appropriate fashion. And if we act in the world with some kind of miscognition about the actual nature of the world, then those actions are bound to bring some kind of pain to us. So say, for example, if we see snake mistakenly in a rope, then obviously it will bring a lot of anxiety to us. We wouldn't be happy with that situation. So similarly, such situations of error at a larger level could be considered as a cause of general lack of well-being. There is something wrong somewhere, as I mentioned earlier, in the way we cognize the world. Therefore, a proper knowledge of why errors occur is necessary, because if we have a proper knowledge of why errors occur in the first place, then we could probably change our mechanism of knowing, our mechanism of cognizing things accordingly, and there would be less cases of error, if not no cases of error, which would result in less pain. And ultimately, if we persist with the right kind of cognitions, we might ultimately achieve liberation, that is ultimate well-being or moksha. So now, having understood that, we need to understand different takes on the issue of error. First of all, as we have discussed earlier, there are two theories of validation in classical Indian philosophy that we find. One is Swata Pramanyavad, according to which all cases of knowledge claim are self-valid. And then there is another theory about it called Pramanyavad, which means extrinsic validation, which means that in a particular situation of cognition, we need to go outside the cognitive situation in order to judge whether an object has been cognized correctly or not. So, now, if according to intrinsic validation, all knowledge claims are self-valid, this is a very peculiar kind of a claim on the surface. And as we discussed earlier, according to them, the reason why we should think of a given cognition as self-valid in the first place itself is because if we try to give some extrinsic reason for the validation of a particular cognition, then in turn those reasons could be circumspect, in the sense that further questions could be asked about why that particular kind of mechanism was chosen. Can't we be mistaken about that mechanism as well? So say, for example, I see water somewhere, I go and drink it and find it to be an actual case of water, quote unquote. But why not could I be mistaken about the taste of the water also? Maybe it is a dream. So cognition always remain in a circumspect situation. They are always in need of further and further validation. That being the case, this process of validation could be never ending. It could lead to infinite regress, and therefore it's a better choice to think of any given knowledge claim as self-valid. Now the problem with such theory would be that on such accounts it will be difficult to account for errors. It stands to reason, it stands to common observation that we often come across such situations where cognition occurs, a certain cognition occurs, but is found to be not correct on later inspection. So, if all knowledge claims were to be valid in the first place itself, then such situations should not arise. In other words, if intrinsic validation were true, then no errors should occur. So, after having understood this, we would find that any philosopher maintaining intrinsic validation theory would not be or should not be able to account for the cases of error. Now, so therefore, first of all, we would take up one such theory of error, which is called Akhyativad. Akhyati means no error. This theory of error is propounded by Prabhakar Mimamsakas and is very interesting to understand. So, according to this theory, cases of error actually do not involve, so to speak, any miscognition. I mean, those are not cases of error per se. The reason why Prabhakaras say this is because, according to them, what happens in a situation of error, if we analyze it further, is that in a case of error, say for example, somebody is walking down on a sea beach and somebody happens to see somewhere a piece of silver. Now, thinking of that particular object to be a piece of silver, we pick it up and we find that it's actually an oyster shell, not actually a piece of silver. So, in this case, there appears to be a mistaken, some kind of erroneous cognition. But according to Prabhakaras, it's a cognition but not erroneous. Why? Because according to Prabhakaras, what's happening here is that there is a certain object being cognized, but on the basis of the cognition of a particular quality of that object. Say for example, particular kind of color, particular kind of shining appearing from that object. This is something common to both oyster shell and silver. Now, that being the case, when we cognize, when we come across an oyster shell, particularly the quality of it, the quality of a particular color and a particular kind of sheen that's emanating from it, we get the memory. The memory of silver is somehow invoked in our mind. So, what happens is a particular quality of a particular object, namely in the present case oyster shell, becomes the subject of perception, but in our mind it invokes the memory of silver. So, what happens is cognition of a particular quality of oyster shell leads to remembrance of silver. So, what we think is being cognized, so our cognitive judgment comes from memory. So, and what is happening here is that the difference between memory and perception is being glossed over, in the sense that we forget to make the distinction between the remembrance, a case of remembrance, and a case of actual perception or cognition. So, what happens is that we remember silver, but we think that this remembered silver is actually a case of cognition of silver in the present object. So, but one might say, well, it very much seems like a case of error, isn't it an erroneous cognition? Now, in answer to that, Prabhakaras would point out that, see, this is only a case of not doing something. It's not a case of doing something. So, there is no commitment involved here. What's happening is there is an omission of doing something which actually otherwise should have been done in a case of right cognition. So what is happening is we should have been able to differentiate between the cases of memory and the cases of perception, and we fail to do, or we omit to do that in the present case. But omissions are not errors. Omissions, so to speak, are not something culpable in the same sense our other sort of commitments are. So according to them, not doing something, one cannot be. Another way of understanding it is, you don't hold a person responsible for not doing something. You hold generally a person responsible for actually having done something, having committed something. So if somebody commits a crime, you hold that person responsible. But if a person does not do something, it is not so easy to hold a person culpable for not doing something. Now, of course, there are larger implications of such kind of view, even for legal theory and so on and so forth. But further thinking could be always done across those lines. But for the present purposes, for our present purpose, what we need to understand is that according to Prabhakaras, a case of omission, a case of not doing something could not be tantamount to a case of error. So therefore, according to them, when something is miscognized as something else, like in the present case, an oyster shell is mistaken for a piece of silver, what's happening is we are omitting to do something which we otherwise do in a situation of actual knowing. But omissions cannot be errors. Not doing something is not tantamount to error. Therefore, given that premise, given that assumption, there is no error involved. So that means cases of miscognitions are not cases of errors. So they hold their ground. They begin with the intrinsic validation theory, which is called Swata Pramanyavad, and a natural outcome of that, a natural outfall of that would be that there cannot be any cases of error, and Prabhakaras stick to their ground in that regard, and they say, well, even in the cases of so-called miscognition, no error is involved. So miscognitions are not tantamount to errors. So that's roughly their, very broadly, their Prabhakara's take on the issue of error. This is how they would theorize errors as cases of omission, as cases of no error at all. Having understood that, there is another very important theory propounded by the Nyaya school of Indian philosophy, and they are Pratapramanyavadins. So which means, according to them, in any given cognition, if we want to be sure about the validity of that cognition, what we need to do is we need to go outside the knowing situation, the knowledge situation, and need to check out whether the object works like the object that we have cognized. This is something we have discussed earlier as well. And once we find that object comes up to this demand, then we can certify it as an actual case of knowing, as a case of prama. So first cognition, and now it is certified as a case of knowledge. The Sanskrit word for that is prama. Now, of course, through this example, it's clear that Nyaya Visheshika school is a realist school, in the sense, according to them, objects are independent of our cognition of them. Or in other words, objects are independent of human consciousness. So they present themselves in their own right. They are there, even if there is nobody to cognize them. So if that were the case, if that is the case, then there is another problem that would occur while explaining the cases of error. That means we cognize something only, something that actually exists. So according to Nyayikas, according to, for that matter, any realist, things exist in their own right, apart from sort of independent of consciousness, and they present themselves to the cognizer, and the cognizer sort of cognizes them, and this is how a particular cognition occurs. That means any given cognition has a counterpart, has an actual real counterpart in the world. So, if that is the case, in error situations what happens is we have cognition of a particular object, but it does not have a counterpart in the real world, in the actual world. So, here it would seem that it violates one of the fundamental basic principles of realism. Any cognition should have a counterpart in the real world. So, the basic problem that Naiyayikas, who are realists, have before them while explaining error is that in a situation of error, we happen to cognize something that does not have a counterpart in the world, in reality. Given that, as a matter of fact, the cognition should not have occurred, because we cognize only something that exists. So now the real onus upon the realist is to explain how a particular cognition occurs which does not have a counterpart in the world. That's the main question that the Naiyayikas have to really answer with regard to this theory of error. Now, it is very interesting to see how Naiyayikas give answer to this question, which seems to be very difficult for them. Now, Naiyayikas, their theory is called Anyatha Khyativad. Anyatha, if translated in English, would mean elsewhere, something which is not here but somewhere else. Now, we can get a clue from this word itself, Anyatha, regarding how they are going to explain away the cases of error. How they do it is something like this. Let's take the same example again, namely that of oyster shell and silver. So, what happens in this particular case is that we happen to cognize an oyster shell which shares its particular qualities with silver, and we form a judgment that this is a piece of silver. Now, this cognition, namely, or knowledge claim, namely, this is a piece of silver, on closer examination is not found correct. Meaning to say, what is not correct about it? It does not have a counterpart in the real world. So, the reality of it is missing. It's not real. What is cognized here happens to be not real. This violates the realism of Naiyayikas. Now, how they make this situation compatible with their realism is something like this. They say, well, what happens in the case of error is that we recognize silver which is not here but elsewhere. So, what is happening here is that we cognize silver because they cannot deny that cognition has happened, and they also cannot deny that what has been cognized does really exist. So, what is the problem? What is the mismatch? What is the sort of problem here? The problem here is that silver is cognized which is not here. That is the only issue. Otherwise, there is silver in the world. We cognize silver, which is very much valid. We are not cognizing something which does not exist at all. So, according to Naiyayikas, something that does not exist, we wouldn't even have a name for that. So, there would be no counterpart of something that doesn't exist, even in language. As a matter of fact, according to them, whatever exists in name exists actually as well. And whatever is cognized is known, has a name for it, and also actually exists in the world. So, it operates three ways. If something has name, it can be known, it actually exists. If something exists, it has a name and it can be known. If something is known, then it has a name and it does actually exist. So, according to them, what happens here is that we cognize silver which is not to be found in this particular location. That's the only issue. It exists elsewhere. Maybe in somebody's almirah somewhere, somebody is wearing a silver ring somewhere. Silver does exist in the world. But then the next issue is, Why this? How, how can we cognize something that doesn't exist right across us? How can we perceive something which is not there, given to us? Now, in answer to that, they maintain that there are various kinds of perception. For a thing to be perceived, it's not necessary for that thing to be found at a particular location right before us. So, in certain cases, what happens is we have what they call samanya lakshana sannikarsha. So, there is a special kind of sense-object contact that happens when we see, say for example, this is called samanya lakshana pratyasakti, which means something, some universal feature of something is cognized, where then if some universal feature with a particular thing is cognized, then we immediately cognize all the particulars that belong to that universal. So, say for example, if there is a glass of water before me, then when I cognize that glass, I cognize the glassness of it also. And when I cognize the glassness, the universal of it, then in that moment itself, I cognize all the glasses in the world that have ever been and that ever would be, and wherever they could be. So, this is a special kind of, this is called alaukik pratyaksh. This is extraordinary case of perception according to them. So, according to them, what happens here is, through such kind of extraordinary cognition, we actually happen to cognize silver in a particular location which is not its actual location. So, all in all, the problem here, according to Naiyayikas, is very simple, which is that something has been mislocated. There is no real mistake here. Mistake lies in only mislocation. So, it's not that what we cognize doesn't exist, in the sense it doesn't in the sense that it doesn't exist at all. What we cognize does exist. It's only that it exists elsewhere, and the issue at stake is only that of mislocation. But since something that is cognized has to exist, and they also have to explain somehow how perception of something that is not there right before us could happen, they resort to explanation through what they call extraordinary perception or alaukik pratyaksh. So, these are the two important theories of error that we find in classical Indian philosophy, and both of them come along with their own strengths and weaknesses. So, as I told you earlier, when we look at akhyativad, it could be very interesting for us from the point of view of, say for example, certain from the point of view of philosophy of law. Now, one sort of as we know that when we omit to do our duties, generally we are not, generally speaking, we are not held responsible. So, it becomes a kind of contingent case. Say for example, if I am walking along with a friend and that friend happens to topple over, and I could have prevented that friend of mine from falling down, and if I fail to do that, it's not so easy to hold me responsible for the falling of that friend of mine. I may be morally responsible, but not, so to speak, really responsible, and may not be held legally responsible for that. So, what they are saying about the situations of error seems to be actually correct. The cases of omission are not don't look like cases of error. So, say for example, if somebody is sort of drowning and I don't help that person out, and that person happens to actually drown, a passerby cannot be held responsible for that kind of situation. So friends, in this particular session, we discussed why it is important to theorize error from the epistemological point of view, and we also discussed how a realist school of Nyaya Visheshika explained the cases of error. We also looked at Prabhakara's take on the issue. Thank you. Welcome back, viewers. So in this session we are discussing different theories of error, and as a part of that we have already discussed Akhyativad according to Prabhakaras, and Anyatha Khyativad according to the realist school of Nyaya Visheshikas. Now, there are other realist schools also who have very important views, theories regarding error, why errors occur. Among them, we could maybe, from the realist point of view, on a very interesting theory that is propounded by Ramanuj, who is a philosopher comparatively of recent origin. He has a very interesting view on error. So according to Ramanuja, what happens is that the entire world, anything in the world for that matter, is composed of what is known as Panchabhutas in classical Indian philosophy generally, and most of the schools agree to this part, that world is composed mainly of 5 fundamental elements in the universe, namely air, fire, water, and so on. So since all the objects, whatever in the world, are composed of these 5 fundamental elements, so in a certain sense all of them are same, in a certain sense, in the sense that ultimately they are composed of the same Panchabhuta. So what is different about different object, I mean the sort of reason for differentia that exists between different objects is a result of different proportion, ratio, different combinations of these 5 elements in different objects. So objects substantially, from the point of view of the substance, do not differ from each other in large amounts. The difference is only basically due to different proportions of these 5 elements as they occur in different objects. So this is a kind of a thoroughgoing realism of a different kind, and also one could sort of point out here, it stands much sort of closer to also otherwise scientifically held view, that ultimately whatever reality, anything that exists in the world actually is composed at atomic level of the same particles, same energies, and so on and so forth. So there could be anything in the world, but it could be explained in terms of the minutest, the nature of minutest particles that it is composed of. Now, again, as I pointed out earlier, any theory of error based on realism has this difficulty before it that cognitions should have a counterpart, a real counterpart in the world. So whenever we cognize something, it has to exist in the world. So that's the onus upon the realist. We cannot have cognition of something that doesn't exist, because this is more conducive for idealism. According to idealism, world is reducible to ideas. So, and a realist differs from an idealist on this point of view. According to a realist, world can never be reduced to mere ideas. World exists as an independent reality, as a reality which is independent of ideas, consciousness, and so on and so forth. So now, if somehow it could be, if it cannot be proved that what we know, what we happen to know in a situation of error does not have a real counterpart, then it would sort of naturally result in some kind of idealism. Then only explanation that remains is that we had an idea of something which doesn't actually exist. This is what idealism propounds in any case. So then realism would get conflated to idealism. So that's the main difficulty before any realist theory. Any sort of realist epistemological theory. And Ramanuja, also being realist in this sense, has this difficulty of explaining why do we see something if it does not exist at a particular place. How he tackles this difficulty, how he answers to this difficulty, is somewhat like this. He says, well, at the end of the day, so to speak, all objects in the world are composed of the same fundamental particles, of the same fundamental reality, namely the Panchabhutas. So, in that sense, everything is present in everything else, in a certain sense. So, since a glass is composed of the Panchabhutas and a cup is also composed of the same Panchabhutas, it's the only difference is in the proportion and so on, then that means fundamental reality of everything is same. So there is a little bit of cup, if certain proportion were to be changed, cup could become glass and glass could become a cup, so to speak. So if that is the situation according to them, what happens is that due to some impediments, it could be defect in our perspective towards the thing. It could be that our vantage point, towards the object is not correct. There could be something intervening, fog or whatever. There could be whatever reasons. So, as a result of those events, what happens is a certain portion, a certain part, so to speak, a certain part of the actual nature of the object becomes hidden from us, it becomes removed from us, and a certain other part still remains available for our cognition. So what happens is that things are only partially cognized, and as partially cognized, they appear as what they actually are not, because actually it is something else. But since Panchabhutas that go into composition of it are same, when we partially cognize it, it may appear as something quite different. So according to them, this is what is happening here. And the moment certain impediments in a case of such kind of erroneous cognition, the moment impediments are gone, we recognize the actual nature of the object, because in that kind of situation, we are not in touch with only what an object partially is, but we are in touch with what the object actually is. So therefore, according to Ramanuja, there is no actual sort of no wrong cognition, so to speak. Something that is cognized in a particular object actually does exist, and as a matter of fact, there is no mislocation also, because it exists as partially being a reality about that object itself. So this is how Ramanuja would explain or would theorize about the cases of error. As opposed to Ramanuj, another very important philosopher in classical Indian philosophy, namely Shankara, explains cases of error in a slightly different way. So according to Shankara, what happens is that a particular cognition is correct, first of all, unless it is proven wrong. So what happens is, say for example, actually we'll have to take a different case, a different kind of example of error for explaining Shankara's view of error. According to Shankara, everything in a certain way is of the nature of consciousness. So Brahma, which is the supreme reality, according to him, is of the nature of Satta Chitta Anand, pure existence, pure consciousness and bliss. So in a certain way, therefore, he is more inclined towards idealism rather than realism. So according to him, a situation, like reality about something is, say for example, in a case of dream, dream is, we do not know the unreality, the untruth about dream unless and until we are over with it. Only when the dream is over, we sort of have this awareness that what we were cognizing earlier in the dream was not a case of truth. So it didn't actually have any counterpart in reality. But till the time we were in dream, till the time we were seeing something in dream, that was real. From the point of view of, therefore, from the point of view of inside the dream, this was the truth. From the point of view of, from a vantage point of view, so to speak, outside the dream, it was a case of false apprehension. So what happens here is that in a case of error, you actually see things, you actually cognize something, you actually feel something to be the case. And from that particular kind of a situation, from within it, it is real. And it's only after that episode is over, that dream episode is over, when you are at a higher pedestal of consciousness, that you realize that what you were cognizing was not correct, was a case of error. So, from the point of view of outside the knowing situation, it was unreal. But from the point of view of inside the knowing situation, it was not a case of error. So, here, according to Shankara, we cannot decide one way about, irrespective of the perspective. We cannot take a decision about the reality or unreality of an event of cognition. So, if you look at it, Shankara is much more liberal about, is much broader in his approach towards error. So, according to him, we cannot categorically, or we rather should not categorically decide about reality or unreality of a given cognition, because without taking into consideration the vantage point from where we are taking that decision. So, the vantage point, the point from where we are deciding about the truth or untruth of the cognition is important and has to be taken into consideration when we are making a judgment about erroneousness or otherwise of a given cognition. So, if that is the case, then if we then, in a case of error, what happens is that we know, after the dream is over, we know that what we saw in the dream was not real. But as a part of the dream, it was real. As not a part of dream, it was unreal. Which means to say it's difficult, it's almost impossible to categorize it as either real or unreal categorically. So we cannot, therefore, on Shankara's account, take a categorical decision about erroneousness or non-erroneousness of a case of error. Therefore, his theory is called anirvachaniyavad. Anirvachaniya means something that we cannot speak about. So something anirvachaniya, the literal translation of it would be unspeakable, uncategorizable. So the point here is that since we cannot have an unequivocal categorization of a given piece of cognition which has been found to be erroneous, we cannot categorize it as real or unreal in absolute sense. Therefore, all the cases of error are an error situation in that case is a tricky situation which is not categorizable, about which we cannot actually speak. We have no word for that, because in that case we'll have to actually say, well, it both is and it isn't. If somebody says, well, what you see in dream, is it real or it is unreal? So a person has to say, well, from the point of view of dream, it was real. From the point of view of waking state, it was unreal. Then what we are actually saying in that case is that it's both real and unreal. But logically speaking, something cannot be deemed to be both real and unreal. That would be incorrect to say, but that's the only way to describe it. Therefore, since we do not want to be logically incorrect about this, therefore, only other way for us to talk about cases of error is to say that, well, we cannot categorize them. We cannot put them into one category or the other unequivocally. So this is largely speaking, broadly speaking, what Shankara has to say on the cases of error. Now, another very important school of philosophy, which is Shunyavad. This is a school of Buddhism. According to them, things are of the nature of shunya, meaning to say, things are ultimately of the nature of nothingness. What does it mean? In this regard, it is important for us to know that, according to Buddhists, things change every moment. Things are in a perpetual flux. So, they are constantly changing from one moment to another. That being the case, the moment we would find a particular judgment about a particular object, it is already something else. It is already changed. So, therefore, there is always a gap between what we cognize and what at that given moment it actually is. So, since there being always a gap between our judgment and becoming, which is the fundamental truth about the object, since this gap always exists, therefore, in that sense, our knowledge judgments always fall short of the actual nature of the object at that given moment. Which further than that, they also point out that language can never capture the reality about the world, because the only fundamental reality about the world is that it's in a perpetual flux. So, as opposed to any realist take on this issue, say for example Nyaya Visheshikas. According to Nyaya Visheshikas, if there is something, if we have a word in language, then that word, whatever that word represents, actually exists in the world. So there is one-to-one correspondence. If we know something, we know something only what exists in the world. Something that is never there would never be known also by us. So this is quite in contradiction to such kind of realist view about knowledge and existence. So, according to now Shunyavadan, as I already pointed out, there is always a gap between the knowledge judgment and the changing nature of the object. So, the moment we form judgment, the object is already something else. That being the case, they say, in a certain sense, all our cognitions, which are verbal in nature, knowledge judgments are always verbal in nature. Therefore, all knowledge judgments, if they are verbalized, they are always erroneous in that sense. So, they believe that we cognize something that does not actually exist. This is absolutely in contrast with the realist principle. The problem before the realists is to account for the possibility of cognition of something that does not exist. And if they are unable to prove that something was cognized but it doesn't actually exist, then they fall back into idealism and their realism is violated. Now, in Shunyavada philosophy of Buddhism, this notion is precisely what is attacked. According to them, language is always short of the real nature of the object. The real nature of the object is void or shunya. So an object is never appearing before us as so and so. A table, is not suggesting about itself as that it is a table. Table is not coming along with any suggestions about what it actually is. So, what we cognize does not really have a counterpart in the world. According to the realist, a table is cognized as a table because it has tableness in it. How do we cognize tableness? Nayayika would say, well, we actually see it. And as I pointed out earlier, in the earlier part of the lecture, they resort to extraordinary cases of perception to account for the perception of these abstract entities like universals or samanya as they are called in Sanskrit. So things are what they are because of certain universals that actually reside in them as objects of knowledge, and they are known as such. How they are known as such? They are perceived as such. We perceive them, and which means tables suggest themselves to us as tables. So tables present themselves to us, for example, as tables. Objects come along with the suggestion of what they are, what they actually are, as a part of their existence. Since as a part of their existence, they have the universals residing in them, they have samanya residing in them. For a Buddhist, what is known as samanya, or the universal aspect of the object, is only a figment of imagination. It's not real. How does it happen? How do we form such beliefs that there are universals residing in particular objects? In answer to that, what Buddhists point out is that, the changes that an object undergoes are so subtle that we often gloss over the difference that an object incurs from one moment to another, and it stands to observation as well. So what happens generally is, suppose suppose somebody has a tree outside her home, and each day when you wake up, you see that particular tree. Now obviously there must some leaves must have fallen down, some new leaves must have grown upon that tree, but these subtle differences are often glossed over, and we ascribe a particular broader identity to that particular object. But now, if strictly speaking, the ontological nature, the actual existent object has changed. Say for example, like 2 days prior to your cognition, that object, ontologically speaking, ontologically meaning from the point of view of real existence of it. So from the point of view of actual existence of the object, it has changed. It's certainly not the same object. The number of trees, the number of leaves has changed. So many things have changed. But because of certain similarities, we gloss over the differences. So what happens is we are more inclined towards what in Buddhism is known as abhed agraha. Things come along with differentia, bhed, but there is always abhed agraha. So in our mind we gloss over the differences and fail to see the bhed and register abhed, non-difference. So this is how we form a judgment about a particular object which is in perpetual flux in our mind. But in the case of error, according to them, what happens is we cognize something, and this is where, as I've already pointed out to you, they are in complete contrast. They are in complete sort of opposition to the realist point of view. So according to them, in a case of error, what happens is that we cognize something which is not actually there at all. So in actually speaking, there is void in the world, and through a figment of imagination, we create cognition of something at a place where it doesn't exist. So viewers, in this session, we looked at Ramanuja's, Shankara's and Shunyavadin point of view towards theories of error. Thank you.
On that note, I would like to thank sir for this very enriching lecture, and I would like to thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.